Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Andrea and I talking through the signs that you need a health phase and also the signs that you are ready to finish your health phase. So, should be a fun topic. I'm excited to get into it. Um, but before we get into that, Andrea, fill us in. What has been going on with you this week? Any updates for us?
Yeah, just getting back into my normal training, and I'm incredibly sore because of that. Because
Same.
like 1 week off, it's like I never lifted before, which is crazy. So in the fat loss phase, my weight was down pretty quickly the last 2 weeks, and then this week it's back up a little bit, which it'll be interesting to see what happens with my check-in. Last week we held so I was down 2 pounds for 2 weeks straight and then down 1 pound this past week. But it just held for a really long time. And this week is a little bit up. So we'll see if I have a drop this week in either my calories or just on the scale. But
Yeah.
I know a lot of that is inflammation from being pretty sore. And
Yeah.
then also I have high days and low days with training and rest. And so I'm eating more food when I'm training. So there are different factors there, but it'll just be interesting to see what happens. And I'm I'm kind of at that turning point where I'm like, okay, let's get this done. Let's
Yeah.
like rip the band-aid off, finish it out, because I'm probably like 10 pounds ish away from where I want to be,
hmm
which feels fairly close. And so I'm like, all right, let's do it. Let's get there.
Those last 10 pounds are going to make a huge difference too.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be fun to see. That'll put me around 140. It'll be fun to see like, okay, at 140 this time versus I was 142 at my leanest last time.
hmm
Hopefully I'll be significantly leaner.
Oh, I'm sure you will be. You've built a lot of muscle in the time between. I'm excited to see that. Okay, cool. Anything else on your end then?
No, that's pretty much it. What about you?
I feel like ours are both pretty similar, of course. So
Yeah.
I'm 3.5 weeks into my mini cut now. And similarly to you, getting back into training after being sick, that took the whole week off. First couple of days were just like pretty shitty, just not good training days, so it wasn't all that sore. Then like my pull push lower, which is like Friday, Saturday, Sunday for me, was feeling really good. So it went pretty hard there. And I was so sore. Like going into like 3 days later, like training. So like when I trained legs again, it was like, man, my quads are still so sore. Or like when I had to train upper again on Tuesday, my chest was still so sore from Saturday. Um, but similarly, and this is what I expected, right? You're sore, there's a lot more inflammation. Um, my weight didn't move a whole lot. I mean, what, January 20th, I was 221.6. And then I mean, basically like 23rd, I dropped all the way down to the 220.8, I guess. Just looking at my tracker here. But basically the 20th, I dropped down to 221. And I mean, I started that the 16th, I was 226.2. I was losing super quickly. In those 4 days from the 16th to the 20th, I went from 226.2 to 221.6. And then over the next, 10 days, I went from 221.6 to 221 or 220.9. Basically, like, the next week I started at 220.8, I ended at the 220.9. But I really wasn't like too worried about it. It's been, again, that's really what I expected with just more like sore as I was. I was losing really quickly. So, I mean, this morning I was 219.2. So finally saw like a little bit of a drop again, which is what I expected. But I mean, okay, first 3 days of this phase, mini cut, I lost 1.8 pounds. Then the following week, I lost 4.6 pounds on average. That was like my average weight change, 5.9, 3. So what I'm down like 13 pounds total so far. But it's really been like for the last week, I'm down like 12, 13 pounds. But I'm seeing like visually, even from the start of the week till now, I can see I'm a lot leaner. Like I started to see like on my like upper quad, like some veins coming through, like my lower abs, like a little bit of vascularity there as well. So definitely like even from the start of the week till now, I've gotten leaner. So I'm really not too concerned with it. But
The
still
only
like
new vein I've noticed is in the side of my forehead.
That's where you want it, right? The
Yeah,
forehead
exactly.
vascularity is ultimate. I have definitely noticed though, like I get the same thing for you, like both of our
Yeah.
faces are way, way leaner,
Yeah.
which makes me happy because my face was getting super round
Yeah.
before. So,
Same.
but that is really it on my end. Anything else before we get into the episode?
Let's do it.
All right. So again, our topic for today is signs you need a health phase and signs you are ready to finish your health phase. So, um, I put out a Q&A box because Natalie and I are recording a Q&A episode later today, actually. And this question came in, and I thought it was such a good question that I just wanted to make it into an entire episode. A little bit hard to actually answer in just like a rapid fire Q&A.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to get into this one. So first, I think this begs the question, what is a health phase? So as you're probably aware, listen to the show, the phasic approach to nutrition we use with all our clients basically entails us working through all these different phases of nutrition, your health phases for some individuals, your primer phases, your fat loss phases, your building phases, your mini cuts for some people, etc. And the thing to understand here is your body is an adaptation machine. So, and this depends on the phase, but certain phases, if we've stayed in that phase for too long, for example, you've been dieting nonstop for years, or trying to diet nonstop for years, you've likely had some negative adaptations occur that are going to be detrimental to our ability to progress going forward. For example, if you've been trying to diet for a very long period of time, we have relatively low energy availability. Wouldn't be uncommon for you to have a missing menstrual cycle. So the goal of moving through these different phases is to allow for the quickest and most effective muscle growth, fat loss, and ultimately the best health, the most sustainable results along the way. But we'll oftentimes need to use a phase like a health phase to fix a bottleneck to our ability to make future progress. So for example, that example I mentioned just a moment ago about, hey, maybe you've been dieting for a very long time, you have a missing cycle. This tells us we probably have downregulated sex hormones. Now, if one of your big goals is to build muscle tissue, we're gonna have a hard time doing that if your sex hormones aren't in a good place until we address that sex hormone issue. So something like a health phase might not always feel like we're working on the goal directly, but it will allow us to get there quicker versus if we just jumped right into a building phase, right? It's very common to like, same thing with fat loss where like we might see like, hey, maybe it doesn't seem like this person's thyroid is in a good place. Similar, I would want like sex hormones to be in a good place before fat loss as well. But it can be tempting to like, I don't want to take like months to like fix this issue. I just want fat loss and jump right into it. But ultimately, like where we're at, we're going to be in a worse place 6, 12 months down the road long term if we don't take the time to address that first. So that's really a big part of what the phasic approach is about. So getting into understanding what a health phase is, really we're focused on improving health, hormones, not that those things are not related. Our calorie intake is normally around maintenance, or we might be, oftentimes that we're even approaching this in a reverse diet like approach where we're actually ramping the person's calories up. You might be below maintenance. We might be really focusing on increasing your maintenance, increasing energy availability. But really here, like you've heard us talk about the primer phases or maintenance phases, like sometimes these are kind of mesh together where a primer phase, a lot of times we'll start a client in a primer phase where, hey, basically we're focusing on mastering the basic nutritional habits and skills that we need for your future success. We need you like just eating good quality food. We need you to know your macros. We need you to be consistent with all this. We understand that a healthy body is a responsive body, right? So again, we're using this to prime for these future phases. Are like, is our biofeedback in a good place? Are there any red flags we need to address? So we're addressing things like digestive issues, low energy, diet fatigue, metabolic downregulation. Those are really, again, like in a primer phase, typically like, hey, before we can build much muscle or lose much fat, we want to make sure these things are in a good place first. So a lot of times, like in a health phase, we're addressing those as well. But alongside that, we might be addressing like something a little bit more advanced or in depth, like more difficult biofeedback or health markers. Like maybe it's a client who is transitioning off of hormonal birth control. Maybe it's someone where, again, like your cycle is missing. We need to improve something with your sex hormones, regulate your cycle again. Maybe its thyroid is downregulated and within what we can, or like working alongside another practitioner, that's something that we're improving. And this does usually, whereas like in the primer phase, we can typically go hard on training and really push there as well. Oftentimes, this phase requires us pulling back on stressors as well. A lot of times, like poor management of stressors or the balance of like our recovery versus the stresses we're applying. So, like under eating, like our food intake being a big part of our recovery, dieting being a stressor. Um, and alongside that, if we're pushing like a huge amount of steps, cardio training, again, the balance of those two being so out of whack that a lot of times it does entail, hey, maybe we need you like to pull back your steps. So this is commonly something that I implement with someone who's like, I'm doing like 25,000 steps a day, 20,000 steps a day. I'm doing cardio constantly. I train 6 days a week. They're extremely lean. They don't have a cycle, etc. Um, so this can also essentially again be a reverse diet phase for a lot of people. Some clients in this place will actually need to gain back if it's like, hey, your body fat levels are so low that that is the bottleneck for us, right? That's why your sex hormones are, or in part why our sex hormones are in a poor place. That's part of why we're having such a hard time building muscle. Sometimes this does even entail, um, sometimes this does even entail the need to gain some body fat back. Anything else you would add there before we get into signs that someone might need a health phase?
Um, I mean, one of the things that you noted with almost every single one of these things is this is a stressor, this is a stressor. And one of the very first courses that we did on looking at lab work and improving things like this, the very first line in that course was that every single thing you see off within lab work, you can point back to stress. And that was something that made a really huge impression on me because whenever we look at all of these things, we're basically just taking that allostatic load and working on bringing that back into balance. And like you said, a lot of times in a primer phase, we can fix a lot of these by just getting in the right amount of nutrients and fiber. But if this is something that's been chronic for a really long time, then it's like you've walked a mile into the forest, you are going to have to walk a mile back out. It takes some time. You can't just like fix this a lot sometimes with the right amount of fiber or or pushing harder in training. So it's not the most fun phase for sure, but like you said, it really is the quickest way to get to where you ultimately want to go with your physique.
Yeah, I think that a very important part of understanding this is it does require being willing to, as you said, like stress, be it I'm addicted to doing 20,000 steps a day. I'm terrified to train less than 6 days a week. Or I love caffeine and I'm like so stressed with work that I only sleep 5 hours a night and I just live off the stimulants. You're probably, it's not going to be just like I just have to take the right supplements and we'll fix this. It's going to have to be like, we're going to have to address the root cause, which is like changing those stressors and a
Yeah.
lot of times like reducing them drastically. So when we're talking about signs someone might need a health phase, any thoughts you would like to kick us off with?
So it depends on the symptoms that somebody is presented with and how we'll address that first. So sometimes we are wanting to look at lab work. Um, that can be something that we address right away, or it can be something that we want to improve, like the lifestyle factors first, and then take a look at that later on. Um, with labs, if you don't have those lifestyle factors dialed in, they can be helpful to see just like proof of what's going on, but those lifestyle factors are always going to be the first step anyway. So it's often like that's the thing that we're going to start with before we even want to go down that road. But um, some things that we're often seeing would be like digestive issues, bloat, gas, constipation, diarrhea. Um,
I would normally like, I would say, I think one of the easiest ways to kind of look at this is like when someone is starting coaching, typically we'll be working through, Okay, what's your diet history? Do they report a history of being non-responsive to fat loss? Do they have a long history of dieting? Specifically, like, do they report being non-responsive to fat loss? Now, that in
Mhm.
itself isn't a reason we're just going to push someone into a health phase, right? Almost like almost everyone reports like uh, a little less so now than it used to be, but like especially when we were attracting a lot more newer clients, almost everyone would report being non-responsive to fat loss. And a lot of times it's like, hey, we're just not consistent. It's not that we like need a health phase to fix this. So that's something important to tease out, but that still would be like, okay, I tick the box that I might want to consider they might not be ready for fat loss yet. In biofeedback, looking for things like, do we have an irregular or missing menstrual cycle? Or do you have like lots of PMS symptoms? You have consistent diarrhea or constipation, which again, that is one where a lot of times it's just, hey, you like live off of protein bars, and that's the problem. We don't get any fiber. We're not drinking enough water. So again, we don't jump right to this, but it's something that could like it be another like okay, another point towards this might be something we want to consider. Or we have poor energy levels despite like we get a good amount of sleep, etc. Even like their current body composition, especially if someone's extremely lean, um, so let's say women below about 13 to 15% body fat, typically men below about 8 to 10%. They'll oftentimes need to gain some body fat back to build muscle, feel their best. Again, a lot of our hormones are tied to the amount of body fat we have on our frame. So we won't be in an optimal position hormonally if we are too lean. And again, exactly where that number is will vary for everyone. But you will then oftentimes see this reflected in someone's biofeedback if they're not if like any of these variables aren't in a good place, or excuse me, if like we're looking at the biofeedback of someone who would potentially need a health phase, you'll typically see things alongside what I mentioned above, like they have low energy, low libido, hunger. Oftentimes, I would say they have low hunger pretty typically, despite eating like less than we would expect. They might have trouble or report trouble training hard, or they just feel like shit in the gym consistently and they have trouble recovering, have trouble building muscle and strength, or even feel they've been losing it. Again, a missing or inconsistent cycle, digestive issues. I would say also to a large degree, the amount of muscle tissue someone has been able to build and the amount of muscle tissue someone has tells me quite a bit here. Um, Normally, if someone has a lot of muscle tissue and they're very lean, hey, we might need a health phase just because, like, maybe you push to get shredded for like a bodybuilding show, for example. But if that person's been able to build a large amount of muscle tissue, typically their sex hormones are, or at least recently were, in a good place, given like they didn't just like use anabolics to get there, I guess, which really isn't like most clients we bring on board. Um, Typically like hey even like things like their gut health is in a pretty good place. They've been able to absorb and use all those nutrients or most of the nutrients they take in to help build this muscle tissue. That's a really interesting one, right? Where again, like if the person is extremely lean, yeah, they might need to gain some body fat back for health, but there's a lot less like solving outside of that that needs to happen versus that person who's really struggling to build muscle. But as you said as well, like when we identify, okay, we probably do need to enter a health phase, I do really like to look at lab work. So we're not just guessing at like, okay, what do we think is going on here? Okay, let's get clear. Like, what are the issues? Where are our sex hormones at? Where is your thyroid at? Whatever it is. It's going to make it so much easier for us to solve the right problems and take the most effective approach. Anything else you would add there?
No.
Cool. Okay. Let's talk through then some examples of just clients who have gone through health phases. Why don't you start with your own health phase? Because this was not that long ago. I think this is a good example. So talk us through like what was going on and just big picture, like how long it took to solve that, what it looked like.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is important to note is like I didn't feel that bad, and it's kind of like something that you just slowly get used to. And so it's not, I mean, some people definitely will have like really glaring issues and they feel really poorly. There's also the case a lot of times though that, and this is where I was at, that you just kind of like get used to how you're feeling and you don't feel like it's abnormal or bad. But I did have like bloat and abdominal distension, so that was a good sign that there was not great gut health going on. Once I got my lab work done, we saw that sex hormones were low. So all three, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, were all really low. And then my thyroid markers were also low. So I had let that go for quite a while for it to get to that point. And so that was a big reason why I had to spend such a long time in a health phase. I spent a year just solely focused on those things outside of fat loss, a little over a year, but I spent 18 months with my training intensity pulled back and really like pretty heavy focus on all these things. So what we did there, what my coach implemented for me was I ate in a surplus for quite a while to see if just spending some time in an energy surplus would help improve some of these things. You're not going to improve in an energy deficit. I was not pushing for any sort of physique change. I was keeping 4 to 5 reps in the tank, pretty low frequency training, really just there for maintenance and probably my own sanity. I did a gut health protocol eventually. So I did a SIBO protocol, which was really helpful for my gut health. A lot less bloat and distension by this point, which also definitely was the SIBO protocol, but also in conjunction with just lowering overall stress load, which makes a huge difference. And then used quite a few supplements to bring hormones back up. Like I probably couldn't even list them off, especially now being removed from it for quite a while. But it was a lot of supplements, honestly. And also something to note here is that even after that 18 months of like supplementation, really heavily focused on this, most everything was in a pretty good place. My testosterone was still low. And so at this point now I just use testosterone replacement to get me to a normal, healthy level, because it was going to require continued like heavy supplementation, heavy focus, pulling my training back to keep that in like just a decent
Like a
place.
low range.
Yeah,
So
like a low range. So that's something that I decided was worth it for me. But everything else has maintained in a really good spot since that point, even with now being able to push my training.
yeah, that's pretty normal for a woman in her mid 40s like you. Um, but that's a really good example of it, right? It's where let's say that's a really good example of someone who's a bit more advanced, where hey, it was still like you've been able to do a lot with your physique already, but fat loss I know was just so grindy for you, and there was a lot of things that it's been cool to see how much better you responded to things since then. A couple more client examples I can think of. I'm not going to name names here because I feel like with like health phases, a little bit more touchy whether people want
Yeah.
us to mention them by name or not. Um, but I can think of two clients here. One who was starting very lean and had a lot of muscle. So I just basically had almost finished a show prep, decided to pull out just due to the way that she was feeling. That was when she started coaching. Now, typically in an instance like this where someone is very lean, they will typically need to regain some body fat. But this person will almost always be in a place where they'll be pretty responsive to whatever you do from there. Again, this person, they've been able to build a lot of muscle. So typically, they didn't get to this point where they're extremely lean by just, hey, you've undernourished yourself. You've done such a poor job like managing stress versus recovery for so long. It's more so we treated our body well. I was in a healthy, responsive place. I built a lot of muscle and I intentionally pushed to get this lean. Now, for said client, like she wanted to be able to maintain a similar level of leanness to where she was at the time, but was experiencing extreme hunger, lots of food focus. She had really bad PMS symptoms, constant fatigue, low libido. Her strength was regressing. She felt like she was losing muscle. She was chronically sore from her training. So we started her in a health phase. We focused on reverse dieting her food up. Initially, I jumped her food a pretty decent bit, still at like slightly below what I estimated to be her maintenance. And then just clarified with her, dude, we're gonna have to be okay with putting on a little bit of body fat from where you are currently in order to address everything we're seeing here, in order to get you feeling your best, because she was shredded when she started. And long term, we were able to kind of lower her body fat floor, so to speak, by building a lot more muscle because we took the time to get her in a healthy fit place. But that's what I laid out to her. Like, your body is clearly telling us right now that you're not going to be able to maintain this lean of a physique with where you're at currently. So again, we might need a little bit more body fat, but if we build more muscle relative to that, again, you will look leaner and you can kind of maintain a leaner appearance without feeling like shit. So that's like long term what we did for her. As we gained more body fat, fed her more consistently, and we didn't have to gain a ton. She still was very lean by the end of the health phase, but she had to gain some. She didn't look as lean as she was when she started. Long term, it worked out for her, but she's willing to play the long game there. And then addressing PMS symptoms, she was basically someone who had PMDD, and half the month for her was just awful. So we started out. I don't remember what supplementation. I think we used. I think we started with like it was like a B6 magnesium chaseberry. I don't remember what other supplements we used at the time. And that, like, we supplemented, improved a lot. She was also someone who was in her 40s. We had looked at her sex hormones, her testosterone was low. And eventually she decided as well, like, HRT might make sense. So then she started taking testosterone also, testosterone and progesterone. And that really helped significantly on her end also. And then the other client I can think of is also starting very, very lean, but not much muscle at all. Now, for this person, I would say this is probably like one of the most common, hey, right away, this person needs a health phase, where this is someone who is oftentimes, and I don't want to like put everyone in a box here, but a lot of times when it's like this person is below a healthy level of lean, and again, we didn't necessarily intentionally get ourselves here, like I dieted down for a temporary period of time. We've also struggled to build a lot of muscle. Typically, this is someone who might have been leaning more towards undernourishing for a very long period of time. So missing a lot of the most important macro and micronutrient needs. Sometimes can even be over focused on like, I'm going to eat a ton of protein, for example. That's less likely to be stored as fat. But then neglecting those other macronutrients that are so important for things like their sex hormones, etc. And again, they've usually lived there for a long time and might just be used to things like, oh, I'm just always like, feel like my stomach is super bloated and I'm always constipated. That's just normal. Or I've just, like, my cycle has been missing or inconsistent for a very long period of time. A lot of times as well can be leaning towards like, hey, I train a ton. I train like 6, 7 days a week, for example, where I do a huge amount of steps. So here, and again, this is typically the person who it'll take the longest to, we'll have to spend the long, I don't know if that's necessarily true, honestly. It's just psychologically the change should be a lot harder because that's where it is like, dude, we really have to pull back on the stressors and be willing to change a lot as far as what's gotten you here.
Well, that's the thing that determines the timeline, right? Is how
Right.
much and how quickly is this person going to buy in? And if you can go all in here pretty quickly, it might not be that super long of a timeline, but usually that's not the case. Just it's a hard thing to jump in with both feet.
And that's okay too, right? It can just
Mm-hmm.
take, it's a challenging thing psychologically. So when we're looking at signs that you're ready to end the health phase, what would you say are the biggest things you're looking for there?
Well, we've talked about all of these different symptoms that come along with needing a health phase. And so essentially, it's just going to be a reversal of those things. So we should see good digestion, which would mean a daily bowel movement at 3 to 4 on the Bristol stool chart. Having a regular cycle, which can be, I'm not going to say the exact numbers, right? But somewhere between like 26 and 31 days, somewhere within that, or 35 days, I think it is. But a pretty consistent monthly cycle. Ovulation, if you're within ovulating age range. And then you're probably getting lab work here in this type of case. So we should see things looking pretty good on lab work. There's not going to be like a perfect set of labs. So we're not hyper fixated on that. But we should see that things are improving. There's no glaring patterns of things going wrong. So, like,
Hmm.
for example, we might see in someone's initial blood work that, like mine, testosterone is low, estrogen, progesterone, thyroid numbers are all low. Maybe in the next set of lab work, we see, okay, estrogen is in a good range. Your progesterone is really good. It's almost within normal. Testosterone is coming up really strongly. Thyroid numbers mostly look pretty good. Maybe one or two are still low, but everything is trending toward normal, and your symptoms are trending toward normal. That's really what we're looking for there. And as long as that's the case, then you know that you're on the right track with those things. And typically, I would say most things are going to be what, like 3 months or so, in terms of like bringing thyroid numbers back up. Sex hormones can be a little bit longer. It also depends on how many of these things compounding together are going on. So, like gut issues might be their own thing. And then, we take 3 months for that, 3 months for sex hormones, and like start compounding those things together. But we should see that like all of those symptoms are either gone or making massive improvements.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't be hasty to leave too early. I think it
Mm-hmm.
can be easy to like, and especially don't just like jump right back into what you were doing before, or we'll end up
Yeah.
back there. Um, but yeah, a lot of times it will be, I mean, if we're looking at, if labs were the thing we looked at to start this phase, like we had established, if sex hormones were low, yeah, like we want to see a consistent cycle. That'll be in like a recurring cycles that are again regulated within and like the time frame we want. So like 28 to 33 days, whatever that 26 to 33, somewhere in that range, right? And we're consistently seeing like, hey, relatively similar links, very, very similar links between
2 to 3
cycles.
months
And
in a row.
yeah, and it showed up multiple months in a row. It's not just, oh, you got one cycle back, cool, we're good to go. Or with a thyroid, right? We would want to also, unless I would say there, unless we see like, damn, dude, you're losing on what were maintenance calories before, and there's like crazy, it's crazy obvious that we're in a great place here. Even then, I would still probably want to just let's make sure that everything is good here before we wrap this up. And basically, the reasons that we started the health phase, those symptoms have been resolved, and we've seen for consistently at least a few months. And it might be more so like, hey, we've seen, okay, for a month we've been able to maintain, these are in a good place. Maybe we transition to a maintenance phase. We would do a little bit more, but we're still not to push it too hard. But then before we get into like fat loss or building, we're going to want to give it more time to know for certain that like this is your new normal now. Anything else to add there?
I think also if you can, and of course everybody's situation is going to be different, but if you are in a place where you're kind of not you're kind of torn between, okay, I want to either get leaner here or add some muscle here, I would always err toward going build first before fat loss in this situation too,
Hmm.
just because, unless, like I said, everybody's
Unless you
situation is
start
different.
in a
Maybe,
like higher body fat
yeah,
place.
maybe that would actually get you healthier. But for most of these cases, if we're spending more time fueling and eating more food, that means we have that fuel coming in. Maybe we push a little bit harder in training, but it's like one less thing that we're kind of throwing at the body immediately after this health phase.
Absolutely. I would fully agree. Yeah, unless you're like at a higher body fat and we like need you get healthier by dropping body fat, probably gonna be best to spend a large amount of time eating more food because the chronically trying to diet is oftentimes one of the reasons people will end up here.
Right.
Cool. All right, well, that is what we have for y'all for today. If you enjoy the show, do us a huge favor, leave us a 5-star rating and a review. If you would like to apply to work with our team, just go click the link in the show notes, and we will catch you guys next time.